Is there any advice you'd give to folks who didn't serve, who want to honor folks during Memorial Day and, really honor the day and what it represents? Any way that, just advice that how we could best honor them on Memorial Day?
Listen to people. Listen to veterans. When they tell your story, listen to what they're saying. A lot of guys need an outlet, and they don't know who to talk to. So when somebody's trying to tell you a story, let them go. Let them tell that story. Let them get that release.
Well, that should be one of the easier things to do. So I think that we'd all be blessed by that. Well, David, I really appreciate you for kind of open up your heart a little bit and your memories and sharing Jared and Alex's stories with us on Memorial Day, kind of giving us a way to...
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hey everyone, and welcome to American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Cyr. Today is Memorial Day, and this isn't just, another long weekend. It's a day that was set aside to remember the men and women who never made it home. And for a lot of veterans and active duty service members, this day carries a weight most people will really never fully understand. Memorial Day for them isn't just about remembrance in general. It's personal because they knew the names, faces, and stories of those who never made it back. So in honor of them, we wanted to share some of the stories with you today. I want to welcome today's guest, David Cyr, who is an Army veteran. David, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
David, thank you for having me. I truly appreciate being here.
Yeah, we appreciate you having on, or coming on for, such a solemn and important day for us in our country's history, and I'm sure in your life.
Yes, sir.
So maybe tell me a little bit about your military service and, what made you want to sign up and, what did you do? And then what branch, how long were you in there? Just all the stuff.
Sure thing. Well, I served in the United States Army for 22 and a half years. I had a period of active duty, left active duty, went in the National Guard for a couple of years, and then came back active duty. But I knew I wanted to be a soldier when I was very young. I remember my dad taking me to see Rambo First Blood, and I knew then that I wanted to jump out of planes, do those sorts of things. And it was always a lifelong goal. As my mom said when I came home, told her I was joining the Army to jump out of planes. She said, I'm not very surprised at all. So I ended up enlisting in April 7th, 1995. I had a contract with the 82nd Airborne Division. I did 3 years. In August 1998, my term of service expired, so I left and went into Connecticut Army National Guard for a couple of years. I was actually in the National Guard when 9/11 happened, and I participated in a couple operations after 9/11, notably the part of the Anti-Terror Task Force for the United States Olympics in Salt Lake City, Utah. And then when I came home, we went down to Ground Zero. And while I was at Ground Zero, we actually watched the crews recover the remains of the last two bodies found. And I knew at that moment in time that it was a moment that I had to go back active duty and fight. So I re-enlisted May 30th, 2002. I was back on active duty, and the rest is history, as they said. So I served in the 82nd Airborne Division, United States Recruiting Command, the 102nd Infantry out of Newbury, Connecticut for a term. So pretty storied history and career there.
Yeah. And so when did you finally part with the military?
I was medically retired on August 1st, 2017.
Okay. So during the course of all that service, and that's quite a bit of service, David, we appreciate that. Where did that take you? What parts of the world did you serve in?
Well, I had a tour in Afghanistan, and then I had 2 tours in Iraq. So 2003, from January 2003 to August 2003, nearly September, I was Afghanistan. From January 2004 to summer 2004 was Iraq. And then again in September 2005 to early 2006 was Iraq for a second tour.
How did you, obviously all of us know, the incredible fighting that went on and tragedy in and what the mission was in Iraq and Afghanistan. But was there was a very different experience being in those two different countries?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think about combat. Charles Dickens said that there was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I may have got that backwards, but, reality, there's nothing that encompasses my service in combat like that, because you see both. You get to see the best of the human condition and also the worst of the human condition. But there are definite differences between Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq, there's a lot more infrastructure than there was necessarily in Afghanistan. I like to tell people, I believe that's part of the issue that people have when they serve, is the fact that we grow up on a preconceived notion of what the world is based off of living in the United States, and it's wrong. And then you go to somewhere like Afghanistan and you realize that everything you believed about the world, maybe not everything, but a good portion of it, is completely different. So now you're trying to redefine yourself in this new world with these new rules. And then, you have trauma that happens. You lose a buddy, you see a buddy get maimed, and you're trying to fit all these pieces into the puzzle that don't necessarily fit like they once did. And it causes a lot of, friction for veterans, unfortunately. But yeah, I think the infrastructure is the biggest piece for sure.
Wow.
Or in Afghanistan would be the lack of infrastructure.
Yeah. I never thought about that aspect of it. That's really fascinating. It makes a lot of sense. So, on Memorial Day, obviously, we're remembering the men and women who didn't make it back. And unfortunately, you had some friends who lost their lives in combat. One of them was Jared Dennis. And what can you tell us about Jared and what he was like? And tell us a little bit about him.
Jared was a 19-year-old soldier. He was a paratrooper. He was a warrior. The last time I saw Dennis, he was on a 50 cal machine gun. We were in an ambush, and I said, "How you doing?" He looked at me and he said, "Sergeant, I'm doing good." And he just had the face of a confident, courageous warrior. We were in an ambush. He was on a medevac, and he was on the way back to our position from the medevac when they ran into a secondary ambush. Now, Dennis, being the warrior he was in the back of the truck, and he saw the enemy. And rather than getting down and taking cover, he stood up, he mounted his weapon on top of that truck, and he opened fire on the enemy, taking their element of surprise. Now, doing so, he drew their fire to himself, and he was mortally wounded. In fact, when they broke contact from that secondary ambush, he ran as far as he could until he couldn't run anymore and ended up getting down under a bush. And when our friend Staff Sergeant Graff from the 82nd MPs found him, he says, "Hey, Private Dennis, I'm Staff Sergeant Graff, 82nd MPs, and I'm here to get you." And Jared, being a comedian he was, said, "Sergeant, it's nice to meet you. I'm sucking." So he was just always the comic relief in our squad, and he went out as a hero.
I imagine there's a lot of stories, unfortunately, like that. I mean, it always is amazing to me that I think sometimes we forget about how young our men and women who have always fought for this country are. But I mean, he's 19 years old. A lot of us feel like people can't make consequential decisions in their life barely at 19 years old. And here he is dying for his country and acting really heroically. What was it like? I mean, you were as a sergeant, your job was to command and direct these men. What was it like serving with all these young people who then you have to, make into a really great fighting force?
It was a privilege and an honor to know men that have the intestinal fortitude and the candor and commitment of Jared Dennis. He was our squad comedian. He liked to joke around a lot. I remember one night we were clearing a compound, and they had, in Afghanistan, for religious reasons, they dye everything red. And they had chickens that turned out pink instead of red. And he said in his accent, "Sergeant Cyr, I can't believe there's pink chickens up. I've seen everything." And, a couple weeks later, we're in another mission. We're riding in the car, and another one of our squad comedians makes a joke. And Dennis looks at me, "Sergeant Cyr, now I've heard everything. I can't believe this." And I said, "Well, Dennis, you've seen and you've heard everything. What else is there for you to do? And again, he went on to show us what he had left on April 25th. And that was to be a courageous and confident warrior.
Wow. Yeah. The thing, whenever I talk to folks who have served like you have and, lost friends, the thing that people always talk about is like often like the downtime, like who was funny, who played pranks, who, just the stuff that, if you're hanging out in a dorm, you'd be talking about your friends about too. It's like the camaraderie there is so special. I imagine it's much stronger and, a lifelong bond.
Yeah, I find the two things that you miss the most when you leave the military, and this is just me saying it, it's common to most veterans I speak with, is the structure and the camaraderie. And that's it. There's a lot of things about the Army that I like to say the Army has a way of taking a fun out of a lot of things that you'd like to do, but it's being with those brothers on your left and right. We all have our own specific reasons why we want to serve. But when you're in the dirt, like we were that day on April 25th, it isn't about your family back home. It's not even about your freedoms. It's not about the Constitution. It's about your brother to your left and right and what you're going to do to be able to be home with them. And when one of them doesn't come home, it's life-changing.
Yeah. Well, you also had another friend named Alexander Van Alton. What was his story? And, when did you first meet him?
So Alex was from Clarksville, Tennessee, and he enlisted in the Army 2004, 2005 timeframe. So I want to say late 2005, early 2004. And he came to our squad, our platoon in early 2005, and then deployed with us in September of that year. He had just married the love of his life, his high school sweetheart, Shayna, and they had big plans, but he was a solemn guy, really quiet, the quiet, consummate professional. He would always step up when somebody was needed, and he would do everything he could. He would do the best he could, and no matter what it was. And I remember when we deployed to Iraq, he struggled a little bit. I remember before we rolled across the border into Iraq, we were in Kuwait, and he was struggling a little bit. He was upset. He was missing his newlywed wife that he's never been away from except for basic training. So, but he pushed on, he pushed through it, and ended up having some great times during that deployment. And then after that deployment, I ended up getting sent out to recruiting command, but their mission continued. They ended up in Afghanistan in a village that we had also visited in 2003 called Sangin, Afghanistan, which is a hotbed. It's also one of the most heavily landmined areas in the world. And Alex, ironically, was the unit was on a mission with the Dutch Army. So it was a joint mission, and some Dutch soldiers had stepped on landmines, and the engineers had gone out and cleared the minefield for people to go in and help. And Alex volunteered. Knowing everything that he had home, he volunteered to go through into harm's way to help these Dutch soldiers and carry them to safety. Unfortunately, on his way back from helping these gentlemen, he too stepped on a landmine and was catastrophically wounded.
Yeah, I mean, the common element there is like you have two friends who are trying to save their colleagues. In fact, in Alex's case, I mean, even from another country, trying to save allies, doing something selfless, and then paying the ultimate price for it.
Yeah, and like I said, he was a quiet, solemn professional, but he was a jokester too. When you got to know him, he would open up a little bit more, and he was just a genuinely good Christian man.
Yeah. Well, when something like this happens, and say you're in the country, and how does the unit deal with that kind of tragedy and that kind of loss?
It's difficult. So yeah. I used my second tour in Iraq in 2005. We were infilling into this city called Al Haklaniyah. Now, we had been deployed to Iraq under emergency conditions because the Marine Corps was having a trouble with this city. So we went in, we put the Marines into the sister city called Haditha that night, and then we refitted in the same night, rolled into Haklaniyah. And we were sitting in what's called a blocking position. So it's a position you're blocking anybody from being able to leave the city so you can cordon the city for your mission. And as we're doing so, I watch a Humvee a couple hundred meters away from me just blow up. No better way. They hit a IED, improvised explosive device, and the truck literally was set in the air and flipped and landed upside down. And the gunner on that truck was my driver, PFC Molinar's best friend. And his name was Specialist Jacob Vanderbosch. And I'll never forget, Rudy looked at me and he said, Bosch. And I said, don't worry, Rudy, he's going to be okay. I knew that he probably wasn't going to be. But it was our first day of a 26-day mission, Dave. So imagine, if you will, 26 days. You have to keep your head on a swivel. You have to be alert. If I let his mind leave the mission for a minute, it could have been a catastrophic moment for our vehicle. So in order to keep us going, and of course, you mourned, but you can't really mourn as you normally would because you're still focused on the mission at hand. So, we did a memorial service there. We all said our piece, but you never really get to bereave and go through the process. And that's really, if you look at it, it's where a lot of people have issues, because you have to compartmentalize. And it was the New England Journal of Medicine said in I believe it was June 2007, that those who compartmentalize have a higher propensity for PTSD. Now, there's a sweet spot, because people who don't compartmentalize also have a higher propensity. So there's a sweet spot where you could do it to get you through the moment, but then immediately start to go through that process. For soldiers, we don't necessarily have that opportunity. So now we're pushing it down, we're compartmentalizing, and by the time we get home, we think we're better. But we're not. It seeps out, and it could be you're in a bridal gallery with your sister getting her final dressing, and then all of a sudden you get this crushing guilt because, I was the one that came home alone, and it starts to seep out. And for some guys, that seepage turns into just a gushing outlet, and then they end up taking their lives. That's why, right now we're looking at up to, they say 17 veterans a day take their lives, but with service members, you're looking at upwards of 50 a day are committing suicide, are removing themselves from this fun place we call Earth. So it's has long lasting effects, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I imagine seeing the horrors that you guys saw, and just the intensity, the constant intensity. It's I don't think the human brain's really meant for that. So I so admire what you all have done in your service. When you talk about Memorial Day today, I got to imagine it's a tough day to kind of, wake up on and think about the purpose of it. But do you have mixed feelings? Like, how do you and other veterans feel about Memorial Day, and how do you approach it?
It's been a process. When I first came home, there was a lot of guilt. It was a lot of pain. But I've decided to do something meaningful. I like to talk about these guys. I like to talk about their experiences so that they're not forgotten. So people know who these heroes are. In fact, my daughter, if she was a boy when she was born, her name was going to be Jared Alexander, after those two heroes. So I find something meaningful, and I'm able to use my ability to speak as an outlet. Many people don't have that, but I'm blessed. I'm able to. I'm grateful for that. But it's really different. Those experiences shaped my belief on Memorial Day. When I was saying that on Memorial Day, a lot of people think soldiers, think veterans, service members. It's really awkward. And we appreciate it. But, there's a distinct difference between Veterans Day and Memorial Day. I know guys that really get upset when people think them. I don't. I appreciate the intent and where people are coming from. But it's really hard to say thank you for your brothers that you lost. It is very solemn. It's a lot different from when I was younger before I joined the military, and I'd be like, hey, let's go, barbecue and go to the beach and have a good time. So now it's, you know what? I really want to remember these guys. I really want to bring importance to what they did in their sacrifices. So that's what it means to be today.
Is there any advice you'd give to folks who didn't serve, who want to honor folks during Memorial Day and, really honor the day and what it represents? Any way that, just advice that how we could best honor them on Memorial Day?
Listen to people. Listen to veterans. When they tell your story, listen to what they're saying. A lot of guys need an outlet and they don't know who to talk to. So when somebody's trying to tell you a story, let them go. Let them tell that story. Let them get that release.
Well, that should be one of the easier things to do. So I think that we'd all be blessed by that. Well, David, I really appreciate you for kind of open up your heart a little bit and your memories and sharing Jared and Alex's stories with us on Memorial Day, kind of giving us a way to remember them and the folks who gave that ultimate last measure to this nation. So thanks for sharing with us, and I appreciate you joining us.
You're welcome. I thank you so much. One last thing, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
There's a lot of people out there that criticize people because they have a good time on Memorial Day. No, definitely go out, have a good time, enjoy yourself. Because I know that's what Alexander would have wanted you to do. They'd want you to go out and have a good time. Just remember them when you're doing it.
Yeah, great advice. Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Too. Well, folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend liberty and freedom. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.